His many accurate forecasts include the 1987 stock market crash, the dot-com bust, the gold bull run, the rise of organic foods, and even the popularity of gourmet coffee long before Starbucks was a household name.
Get the Trends Journal, the best investment you could make, because it's the best investment into your mind, and it can change how you look at the world.
Over the last 30 years, Gerald Celente has been more accurate about predicting what will be happening than anyone else I'm aware of.
The Trends Journal is one of the greatest sources of information, and it really is. You're predicting these things well ahead of time. I would encourage everyone to go grab the latest copy.
Sir, everything that you predicted about the economy, you are absolutely right. So I have followed you all this time, so please take a look at the Trends Journal.
Gerald Celente, the top trends forecaster in the world. Gerald, you had an interesting call back in September of last year. You said gold had bottomed, which is exactly what happened. And here we are, and we're above $1,900.
Are you prepared for what's next?
Hello, my name is Edmund Demarche. I'm the executive editor of the Trends Journal. I'm here with Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran. Professor, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So we have the big news here in the US is Netanyahu is in Washington, and he was meeting with Trump. They had dinner, and he met with Pete Hegseth today. And everything seems like it's all hunky-dory between the US and Israel, and things couldn't be any better. What do you think is being discussed right now in the White House? What do you think the real feeling is? Are things as good as they want Americans to believe?
I don't know what's going on behind closed doors. It is interesting for me that this whole Epstein affair reached this stage while Netanyahu was in Washington. I'm not exactly sure if there's a direct relationship, but it's not impossible. I'm sure that behind closed doors, the discussion about Iran, at least, is that the Israeli regime failed, and that despite the blitzkrieg attack, despite full support from the Europeans and the Americans in this war of aggression, and despite the fact that regimes in the region that are US allies and proxies, their bases were used, American bases in those countries were used to help the Israeli regime, whether in Turkey or Qatar or the Emirates or Bahrain or elsewhere. And despite the fact that the airspace of Jordan, Syria, Iraq were all under Western and Israeli control, they failed. And the Iranians got the upper hand. And Trump admitted this, that the regime took a pounding. And Bannon also, Steve Bannon, said that the real story is that Trump saved Israel. So I'm sure behind closed doors, that is being discussed. I don't think this is over. I think the Israeli regime would like to have more war, and they want the Americans to be involved in the war, because for them, sacrificing the United States is a priority if it's for their interests. And the people around Trump are more than willing to sacrifice the United States for the Israeli regime, because it's clear that their priority is Israel, not the United States. So these sort of things, I'm sure, are being discussed, but I have no doubt that if there is a second round of fighting, it will be worse for the Israeli regime.
Netanyahu thinks Netanyahu thinks that he could pull all this off and all this destabilization of the region and still be in the running for advancements with the Abraham Accords. He thinks that he could achieve the aggression that he's shown in the region and also score a diplomatic coup. Do you see that as just his imagination, or do you think a country, obviously the crown jewel is Saudi Arabia, is that something that you think is possible somehow for Netanyahu to achieve?
Well, let's look at the results of this 12-day war of aggression. Iran has become extremely popular across the world and across the region. despite decades of anti-Iranian narratives by Western media, and the demonization of Iran across the world since the revolution, through disinformation, through bogus reporting on Iran, and then in our region, these despots in the American camp, whether it's Saudi media, whether it's Qatari media, whether it's Emirati media, whether it's Turkish state media, all of them have been promoting anti-Iranian narratives, sectarianism, racial hatred, complementing the Western media narratives. This has been going on for decades. All of that has been washed away. And now Iran is seen, and the axis of resistance, Iran and its allies, as the only sincere allies of the Palestinian people. Erdogan in Turkey doing trade and business with Netanyahu, Aliyev in Azerbaijan, Mohammed bin Zayed in the United Arab Emirates, and so on. Jordan, Egypt, Morocco. So Iran has become extremely popular. The Israeli regime has been exposed as extremely vulnerable because they were unable to, despite the heavy lifting of the United States, they were unable to have control over their own airspace. During the last 3-4 days, Iranian missiles were almost universally getting through, and Iran still hasn't used its newer missiles. So Israel has been vulnerable. Israel is despised because of the genocide and the atrocities that are being carried out on a daily basis. Iran has become popular. Israel is shown as vulnerable. Any regime in the region that tilts closer to the Israelis and Netanyahu, will they be loved and liked by their people, or will they be disliked? So that's the real question. From now on, anyone who tilts towards Netanyahu becomes illegitimate in the eyes of their own population.
How about a population? Oh, I'm sorry. What about a population
and the fact that they don't move away is causing them great difficulty and it's raising questions among their own populations. So the more the Israelis push for genocide, the more they push for conflict, and the more indifferent these regimes in the American camp are, the more potential instability within the U.S. camp there is.
You mentioned in a previous interview Azerbaijan and its relationship with the U.S. and Israel, and you called it, even Turkey, almost like proxies for the U.S. and Washington. Are the people in Azerbaijan, do they side? Are they at least emotionally tied to the Palestinian cause, or is that a popular position and the government's doing what the people there believe and supporting Israel? Is that something that could be compared to, let's say, a Jordan, with where the people are more sympathetic to Palestinians? What's the position? Like, what's your take on Azerbaijan? Is that a fragile government?
It is a fragile government. It is a dictatorship. Many people are in jail, especially those who are sympathetic to the Palestinian people or to the Iranians. They're in jail. This is not something that the West would talk about because Azerbaijan and Aliyev is their man. Just like, remember, in the West, it depends on where the person stands. Saddam Hussein was an ally of the West in the 1980s. They gave him chemical weapons to use against his own people and against Iranians. He wiped out 6,500 people in one single attack in a town called Halabja in northern Iraq, and no one said anything. Only when Saddam invaded Kuwait, did suddenly chemical weapons become an issue. So all these countries in this region, their populations are pro-Palestine. Whether in Turkey, whether in Azerbaijan, whether in Jordan or Iraq or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates, they're all pro-Palestine. There's not an exception. But in some cases, it's a police state, like in Jordan or the Emirates and elsewhere. In some cases, it's much more complicated, like in Turkey. Because the people who even support the current President Erdogan who is, in my opinion, an accomplice in this genocide, they do not want relations with the Israeli regime. Even my friends, my own friends, my personal friends in the Akkad party, the ruling party, they tell me they want the government to break off ties. But they feel that they cannot turn against Erdogan for a host of reasons. Turkish politics is complicated because they will have nowhere to go. So they're sort of stuck. In Azerbaijan, it's a dictatorship. If anyone goes too far, they'll be sent to jail. So, but the point is that the longer this Holocaust continues, the more unstable the American camp. And each time there's an exchange between Yemen and the Israeli regime, or Hezbollah and the Israeli regime, or Iran in particular and the Israeli regime, the axis of resistance becomes more popular. And people have more expectations about their own governments. They're saying, well, if the Iranians are standing up to the Israeli regime, then why are we complicit? Why are we silent? Why are we allowing American bases to be on our territory? Why are we allowing Americans to use their bases, their radar bases, to help the Israelis offensively and defensively? The point that I'm trying to make is that as we move forward, the American camp is hollowing out. And on the surface, things may seem quiet. It's like the surface of an ocean. Things may look calm, but underneath, a lot of things are happening. Remember, before the Arab Spring, or the awakening, or whatever someone would like to call it, whether it ended well or not, good or bad, that's another issue. Before the Arab Spring, it was said, no one believed, no one could have imagined that we would have all these revolutions, all these dirty wars, all this chaos. After a single young man burned himself alive in Tunisia because of a local grievance. We saw the collapse of the regime in Tunisia, then we saw what happened in Egypt and so on. And then the Americans began, along with the Qataris and Turkey and others, began to use Al-Qaeda in Libya, then they went to Syria, and the story goes on. But the point was that no one expected the uproar and no one thought that a young person burning himself alive in protest in one city, in one country, would have such enormous consequences. Today, the situation is far more dangerous than it was back then. Not only is the economic situation much worse, but more importantly, you have this ongoing genocide in Gaza. You have all of the governments in the region that are in the American camp complicit in one form or another, every single one of them. None of them have made any move against the Israeli regime. None of them. None of them have cut off relations. None of them have cut off business ties. Whatever existed 2 years ago exists today. This is not sustainable, in my opinion. And as the U.S. empire declines, it is going to be more difficult for them to control the situation on the ground in the region. So the more that Netanyahu pushes forward for aggression, the worse it is going to be for the Israeli regime. But the issue is that Netanyahu's interests are not the same as the interests of the Israeli regime. Just as the interests of the Israeli regime and Netanyahu are not the interests of the United States. Netanyahu wants to remain in power. He wants to stay out of jail. He needs crisis. He needs crisis after crisis. But the Israeli regime is being destroyed because of these multiple crises, not just economically, militarily, but most importantly, in the eyes of the world, it has become delegitimized. It is universally despised, even in the West, and especially in the United States, which the people in the United States are the most propagandized in the world. People are turning against the regime. And I think that what Trump did foolishly in the cabinet meeting, the way in which he dismissed this whole Epstein affair, actually made things much worse for the Israeli regime in the United States.
Why do you say that? Because it looks like almost like complicity. Is that why? Like that there's no level that's too much. Because Trump recently went on Truth Social, and he appealed to the Israeli courts to drop their corruption charges on Netanyahu, which some people here in the United States saw as remarkable. that the president would say such a thing and get involved in that. And some Israelis even spoke out against it. Are you saying it just goes to show another example of how the U.S. government is so protective of Israel and those ties?
I think the Epstein case, in the eyes of many Americans, shows that it's really Mossad that is in control of many of the politicians in the United States. It's not even the CIA. It's not even the FBI. Whether that's right or not, that's open for discussion. But the fact that Trump dismissed this whole Epstein affair, and we all have seen different people comment on how the Trump team at the beginning, what they were saying a few weeks ago, a few months ago, during the election campaign, and how it ended with Trump's 2 minutes in the cabinet. After all that, I think it raises serious questions. So now people are saying the Israeli regime is genocidal, young people, especially in the United States. It's carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, and it also controls our fate. Not only are we aiding the genocide, but our politicians seem to be controlled through a mechanism of the most corrupt, through the most corruptive methods. In other words, through the means
potential bribery, and
through the means which Epstein was able to, and the likes of Epstein. I'm sure there's not one Epstein. I'm sure there are other Epsteins out there actively working for Western intelligence agencies and for the Israeli intelligence agency in particular. And I would caution all pro-Palestinian activists that they're probably trying to find ways to trap these people as well, to keep people in the movement, or keep people who are active against the Israeli regime. I'm sure they're conspiring against them as well. So all those who are against the genocide in Gaza should be very careful about who approaches them and what sort of offers they receive.
It was one of those things where Trump, I don't think in his whole both terms, I've never seen Trump look so desperate to get away from a question during a meeting with journalists. He just, I mean, even his most devout followers and supporters here in the United States couldn't believe his response and how he interjected when Bondi, our AG, was asked about it during that meeting. It was remarkable to see. And there's not even, as I said, huge followers of Trump. One other thing I'd like to just get your opinion on. It was a very interesting dinner that he had with Netanyahu at the White House. I think it was on Tuesday night. And Trump was asked by a reporter about the two-state solution. And the reporter essentially asked, is this still viable, a two-state solution? So Trump had another remarkable answer. He said, well, I'm here with the greatest man who could possibly answer that question. And he deferred to Netanyahu, which I found jarring, because here's the president of the United States who probably doesn't know enough about the issue to really give an honest and insightful answer, in my view. And so he defers to Netanyahu. And I'm like, if he's doing that in front of the cameras, what goes on when they have these discussions off camera? Did you see that? And what's your take on Trump's position and his decision to defer to Netanyahu, even in front of reporters?
Well, I think it's very clear that there was never any divide between Trump and Netanyahu. And that was all for show. That was all propaganda by the Western media. Again, we have to, the myth of Western media have anything to do with freedom of expression and presenting different points of view. That myth has been exposed. Western mainstream media is a tool of the powerful, whether it's MSNBC or Fox News. It doesn't make a difference. They're one and the same. One may be more bombastic, the other may be more sophisticated. One may, they may have issues over abortion, but when it comes to empire and destroying genocide, they're one and the same. If you recall, when the war of aggression, an unprovoked war of aggression on Iran began, MSNBC and CNN were busy demonizing Iran. BBC was busy demonizing Iran, just like Sky News and Fox News. There's no difference. They were talking about sleeper cells in the United States, demonizing Iranian Americans. Why? So that they could convince the public to be fearful of Iran in order to justify death and destruction. That's how the mainstream media works. They're all the same. There's no difference between them. The CNN is a tool just like Fox News. There's no difference. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Independent, they're all the same. There may be slight differences, but they're all tools of empire. So when they were talking about differences between Trump and Netanyahu, it was just as fake as the differences that we were hearing about between Biden and Netanyahu. If you recall, back then they were saying that Biden is putting pressure on Netanyahu. Then it came out that the United States never put any pressure on Netanyahu to end the genocide. When during Biden's period, when Hamas accepted the ceasefire conditions that the Americans put forward, Blinken would say Hamas has rejected them and Israel accepted them, whereas the Israelis were rejecting them. We all saw it, but they were saying Hamas accepted, Netanyahu rejected, and Blinken would say the exact opposite. Under Trump, it was the same. When the Israelis would reject the ceasefire conditions and Hamas would accept them, Witkoff would lie and say Hamas is not negotiating in good faith. So Western media and the Western political establishment, they're all on the same page. And the Israeli regime, meaning Netanyahu, and the president of the United States, whether it's Trump or Biden, they're on the same page. And so what Trump says in public doesn't surprise me that he would say this. What surprises me is the fact that, the sentiment doesn't surprise, the fact that I would expect him to speak like this in private or to agree with Israelis on all these points in private. I would not expect Trump to say it in public because it's not the smart thing to do. But the good thing about Trump is he says the silent part out loud. That's what makes him, I think, that's what makes him quicken the demise of the empire. He is a catalyst for the demise of the empire because the hypocrisy, he's incapable of the sort of hypocrisy that we saw under Obama. He's incapable of, he says we want the oil. He says Netanyahu is a great man. The others wouldn't say that. The policies are the same, but Trump is more crude and less sophisticated. And therefore, I think he's more harmful for the empire. But the people around him don't recognize that.
You said in a previous interview, I think it was yesterday with Press TV, you mentioned about the US and how after what happened with the sneak attack on Iran from Israel and how Trump provided subterfuge for the Israelis, how the US really is going to have a hard time being trusted in the diplomatic world. And my question when I saw you say that, I have to say I thought, why would the US do that? Is it drunk on hubris? Is it where they don't think, like where Washington actually doesn't think that it needs to operate by the same diplomatic standards, and like they don't care? It's almost like the coolest kid in school doesn't care if someone likes him or not. They're going to keep on being the coolest kid in school, and other feelings be damned. That's what, when you said that, that's what I thought. I thought, what is it about the U.S. that it doesn't even care that it tore to shreds its diplomatic relations on a global scale? Do you agree with that? That it's just hubris?
I think that no one trusts the United States. It wouldn't just be very difficult. It's impossible. I don't see how we could have an agreement with the United States. And I would be very much against any agreement with the United States personally. under these circumstances, unless the United States capitulates in some way, which I cannot foresee that for the time being. I
And
think that
oh, sorry.
I think that perhaps, and again, I'm just thinking out loud. I think that perhaps the United States in the past was that bully at school, which was good looking and a sportsman and someone who many wanted to be their friends, but they also knew that it was a bully. But the United States today is this nasty, sinister, mean bully, which is just despised but feared by many. So I think that that facade is gone. That facade which made it more effective in bullying in the past, it's disappeared. And I think the reason why the United States is behaving in such a crude manner today is because it's a declining empire and it's becoming more desperate. In the past, when it had control, it could be more flexible. It had the luxury of being both aggressive, exceptionalist, carrying out coups here, dirty wars there. But in some cases, it would be more flexible because of its sheer power and because it felt more confident. Today, I think the United States does not feel confident, the ruling regime, the elites. And because of that, they're like, I don't know if you're probably much younger than me, but when I was young, it was black and white movies. People, when they fall into quicksand, the more they moved, the more they sank. Now, the more they sunk into the quicksand. Now, apparently, that's in real life. That's not what happens. But in any case, that's how it was in the movies. So the more they moved around, the more they sink in the quicksand. And in my opinion, that's how the regime and Western regimes are behaving. They're becoming increasingly erratic, increasingly emotional, irrational, and but of course increasingly dangerous because they're constantly lashing out. But I think that that's why the rest of the world is. That's why you see BRICS being formed with all its difficulties and complications and contradictions. That's why you see regional bodies being strengthened in Latin America and Southeast Asia or in Asia or in Africa because the rest of the world wants to protect itself from the United States. And so I think that we are witnessing the collapse of an empire, but this is a very, very dangerous stage in this global transition.
I don't know if you saw the interview with Tucker Carlson and the president of Iran, and I know the president of Iran to be a lot more, at least from the Western depiction, he is seen as a moderate, as someone who is willing to play ball, and not play ball, that's the wrong word, but he's willing to work with the West. He's reach out to the West. At least this is what Western media, this is how they describe him. He's a heart doctor. What kind of, I don't want you to have to go into specific details, but what kind of power does he have in Iran when you have a supreme leader? So like when Tucker does interview the Iranian president, would that be considered more like a figurehead in Iran, or does he actually have power even with the supreme leader?
No, it's not like the one-man show in the United States where the supreme leader, the real supreme leader, is Trump. He can put up tariffs, he can remove tariffs, he can do whatever he wants, he can wage war. He wakes up in the morning, posts something on Truth Social, and the world stock market goes up, or then it goes back down later. A few hours later when he posts something different. That's the real strong man. In Iran, we have a constitution, and there are checks and balances. And of course, the leader, he has more authority and more power than others, but there are checks and balances. And the president has very real power. He's very powerful. He's the second most powerful person in the country. In the West, they like to say that in Iran, it doesn't, because they like to caricature Iran in Western media. As I said, Western media and the media by these Arab oil and gas rich despots, they have their own agenda. but they're quite paradoxical, because on the one hand they say like the president has no power, but if the president in Iran is someone is elected as president in Iran who they don't like, they say this is a threat. But if someone who they consider to be moderate, they see that person as an opportunity. But if there's only the supreme leader, as they like to call him, we don't have such a term in Persian, by the way. That's another Western construct. But if the leader, if he's if he's everything, then why are you concerned about this particular president and less concerned about that one? But the president is very powerful. His interview, and he, by the way, has been criticized a lot because of his interview with Tucker Carlson. Some say he was too soft and that he should have been more assertive about Trump and the United States. I think some of the criticisms are quite valid. Some of the criticisms, I think, are over the top. I think some of what he said was quite good, especially since he was speaking to an American audience and to ordinary Americans, especially people who have respect for Tucker Carlson, and who probably most do not want the forever wars to continue. So, and that just shows how much debate we have in Iran. Some in Iran are condemning the president for the interview, condemning him, and others are supporting him, and some are in the middle, like myself, who think that it had its pluses and minuses. I myself, every time I do an interview afterwards, I'm always dissatisfied with my own performance. So it's, it's something that, I mean, I don't expect the president to be perfect anyway. But the point is that what the president did was that I think he was trying to exploit the fact, in a positive way, that the fact that Americans are seeing through the propaganda, and ordinary Americans are waking up to the reality. Not just because of the economic injustices that are increasing daily in the United States, not just because of that never-ending wars and the fact that Trump is basically showing himself to be the same as previous presidents, not just because of the sheer amount of corruption that the Epstein case has exposed even further, but because ordinary people, many ordinary people across the world, I think, ordinary people, if they hear both sides of the story, many of them are decent enough to look beyond their nationalism and their the propaganda, and if they see something that is truth, something that is true, then they have a tendency towards supporting that. So I think that it was, on the whole, a good interview, and I think Tucker Carlson, whatever, some hate him, some like him, but I think the fact that he's anti-war is a good thing, and not just with regards to Iran, but with regards to Russia. If he was a bit more anti-conflict with China, I would be more happy with him. I think that the United States has to put this mentality aside altogether. But in any case, I thought it was a good interview. I'm not quite sure that's the question you were asking, but anyway, those were my comments on the interview.
I know that you don't have unlimited amount of time. Maybe if I just one more question. Is Iran planning for another war with Israel, the US? I know that Netanyahu, he's playing this game in Washington, that he's not being clear one way or the other. It's like the option is there. And I know Iran is always going to be prepared, but how realistic of a threat do you think another round of war against the US and Israel? What do you think? Do you think it's a likely chance or unlikely at this point?
I think it's likely. I think the Iranians are preparing right as we speak. And I think that if there's another round of fighting, that it will end very poorly for the Israeli regime. They're not going to cut us off. They're not going to catch us off guard again like they did before. Iranian intelligence has dealt with many of these collaborators. The Iranians are going to be more protective of their people, their senior officials in future. Iran will. The Israelis basically did everything that they had. They used all their cards, and they used technology in the best technology available. Zelensky would only dream of the weapons that the Israeli regime has. So Iran now knows what the Israelis, the regime has, what the Americans have, and the Iranians will be much more prepared next time around. And I think the next time around, it will get much worse for Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities. So if I was an Israeli, I would start thinking about moving and going back to Europe and the United States. And by the way, the young lady in the back, I could see it. She was trying to hide. She tried her best to hide, but I could see it.
You know, she wouldn't make a good spy, I'll tell you that much. But Professor, I appreciate you.
Well, I apologize to her because I know how it is when someone is doing an interview, no one can move, no one can talk. It's
she was a good sport.
That's why I'm sitting by the wall so that people. But still, no one can use the television, and everyone here is uncomfortable until I stop.
Well, Professor Marandi, please, everyone, check out Professor Marandi on X for great updates from the Middle East and what's going on. Professor, thank you for talking to the Trends Journal. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.